Charter Commission meeting in the Great Hall on December 13th. Tonight, we have a limited Zoom capacity because our staff person, Michelle Turner, is not with us. She's ill at home tonight. So we're functioning without that person, and she's the one who normally brings in guests over Zoom, which won't be possible because she is the only qualified person that we had lined up so far to operate Zoom. I think this will remind us to have a backup, so it won't happen again. But in any event, I call the meeting to order. This meeting is partially hybrid, in person, as well as partially on Zoom for folks that don't need to be brought in by staff. This meeting is being recorded and is being shown live on channel 15 Comcast and channel 47 Verizon. If we have Zoom attendees, they should register using the Zoom webinar link on the Charter Commission page on the town website. And I think we won't have any Zoom attendees for public comment for the reason I just stated. The in-person audience for public comment, please use the podium and place your name on the sign-in sheet. The agendas, the whole package of materials which the staff would normally bring, I did make copies of the agenda, and we have a few extra copies. And the public comment is scheduled for 8:30. So let's start with the Pledge of Allegiance. So you have 7 members of the commission tonight, present in person and 1 by Zoom, which is more than a quorum. The first item on the agenda were our guest speakers, and since we can't bring them in on Zoom, they've all agreed to be here on January 3rd, our next meeting. I'm hoping in person. And I know these are the current chairman of the precinct chair. I believe she will be here in person, and 2 former chairs of the committee of precinct chairs. So that is that discussion item, which is the role of the precinct chairs and this possible expansion of powers. Since time is getting short here it may not seem like it's getting short, but we have a lot of work to do yet. So I think we need to move along the discussion. And if members of the commission, I think we should still have a discussion of this agenda item tonight. And then the precinct chairs, the people who serve in that capacity, can weigh in on January 3rd. So I'd just like to kick off the discussion of the Committee of Precinct Chairs. Now, this is a committee that was added by charter change to our charter back in the mid-2000s, and it gradually came into its own and began to function. I was the first chair for 3 years, and we sort of established everything from scratch. But since then, it's become an established committee, and in Plymouth, I think it has a real role. It's absolutely unique, I think, across the state in terms of other charters. So the Committee of Precinct Chairs, which consists of the precinct chairs of the current 15 precincts and soon to be 18 precincts, form this committee. And what's interesting about it to me is that its functions are in the charter, and there aren't that many, but they're important, and they're really broad. And I think if we move forward with a form of government that continues to include the Committee of Precinct Chairs, we should discuss its powers. I'm thinking that the Committee of Precinct Chairs, after discussion and some real thinking on this commission might start to function as a real council and possibly could fill in the gaps between town meeting, or this, we should at least explore this, I think, because that's been one of the serious criticisms of our current form of government was there was no way to function in between town meetings, which we have twice a year, and things might fall through the cracks or not be attended to. If this committee of precinct chairs of soon-to-be 18 people were to have expanded powers to take action, this might help, but I think was an initiative, at least, David, these are points that you brought up all repeatedly about how we don't function between town meetings. And can the committee function as a council? Is this a way to bridge that gap? I think we should really explore that. One thing we did try in the mid 2000s was to have the committee of precinct chairs review all town meeting articles except for finance articles, which stayed with the finance committee, and the planning board articles, which stayed with the planning board. That was presented to the town meeting, and it did not pass. It was early in the days of the committee. Perhaps its time has come. We've discussed the finance committee here several times, and several other charters in the state that limit the finance committee's responsibilities to finance articles, several charters. And maybe time to take another look at that. So let's have a discussion on whether you think the Committee of Precinct Chairs' powers can be expanded. It's one way of dealing with the question because it would perhaps give us a counsel and still keep town meeting for certain things where you need a lot of eyes and citizens involved to make major decisions. If we decided to do that, it would take some serious drafting and splitting of responsibilities and limitation of jurisdictions and all that stuff. But let's talk about it. Comment. David Malgudi.
I think the idea has merit. I've said in the past, at past meetings, I've said that the Committee of Precinct Chairs should have a greater role. But I think we should, well, you know what, we can discuss it tonight, but I think we need to hear from the Committee of Precinct Chairs, and I think they're coming in at the next meeting.
Yes.
For the main and simple reason, that's a considerable extension of their duties, and I wonder at that same point that we're debating this, if we should also debate perhaps a stipend for them.
Wrestling, you had a comment.
Yeah, and I totally support having the precinct chairs have some more responsibilities. And I've discussed it with the chair of the chairs. But I think that it does have to be, carefully drafted. It's interesting if you watch where the precinct chairs have gone, because they for the longest time, they met in between town meeting and discussed some things. And they've really, in the last couple years, started to look at how they can take more responsibilities. They've tried to come up with an entity that goes to town hall and says, where are we? I hate to bring up Stevens Field, but Stevens Field is one of those things where we said, all right, we're going to give $3 million to Stevens Field, and 5 years down the road, where is it? And precinct chairs has really started to say, we need to ask those questions. We need to go to the people who have supported this article and go to town hall and find out where it is, where the money is, and where, and I think that's really what the public is really thirsty for, is they want somebody to be minding the store, for lack of a better term. And I think the precinct chairs is, I think they're ready. And I think that they could take on more responsibility, and somebody needs to be looking at the articles and where they are throughout the year, not just twice a year.
Bill, go ahead.
Yes, I think that the precinct chairs over the years have kind of found their way to a point in which they have a focus, and that is facilitating information about articles, not only for their own absorption so that they're better able to vote on an article, but also trying to get that information out to the general public to get feedback. Their caucuses, they organize the caucuses from this level, and as Wrestling has pointed out, they have been forming subcommittees to look at ways of better processing articles after town meeting, that we need to have some sort of legislative tracking after town meeting to see that an article that was voted on, we know where it is at all times in the process of being executed. So I know they're developing a process around that, and obviously, Wrestling has pointed out that Stevensfield is one article. Right. A better example would be the 2010 and 13 articles that we had voted on to handle issues relevant to fire stations and roofing and material that never went to bid and never were executed, and then we ran into a problem years later costing us millions of dollars. Yeah, that's a better one. All right, that's, I do think that, let's see what the precinct chairs have to say, because, David has indicated they're coming in next week. I'd really like to see what they have to say, but since the inception of the precinct chairs, there's been a migration over a period of time to take on responsibilities where they see that there's a gap. They're not trying to tread on anybody's jurisdiction. They're seeing these situations within the institution of Plymouth where there is no one paying attention to that issue, and they've seemed to gravitate to that component and try to fill in that. So they have been working towards that goal. So I do see a relevant an examination of where they are right now, what they might do in the future, but it would be interesting to see the representatives of that group to come in and talk more directly to it.
Mr. Chairman,
Who's speaking?
Frank,
Frank, go ahead.
thank you. Am I audible?
Yes, good and loud.
Great. Great. Yes, I see that whether we intended or not, we're starting to define roles for the COPC. Maybe they've been doing that themselves. I see that myself as 4 roles right now. Facilitate, this is something Bill just referenced, facilitate the movement of articles that have previously been passed. Sometimes things fall through the gap, intentionally or otherwise, and you can't expect the 235 members to be monitoring everything, but you can expect a group maybe like the COPC to make sure that things don't get passed and disappear, or they don't get acted upon as people expect. That's one of the roles I see for them that we are defining. Emergency responsibilities. A lot of criticism of the process is often that we can't respond in an emergency as well as different forms of government. I don't necessarily accept that. In my experience, I've seen the town showing great nimbleness in reacting to responsibilities, but putting more of that responsibility to push forward in an emergency situation within certain bounds could be a good role for the COPC, and I think I've heard that from people. Monitoring adherence, I think someone said something along these lines, monitoring adherence to the charter. As strange as that sounds, we've seen examples in other charters, and we've seen examples in our own experience where the charter is not being followed. There needs to be a group that monitors that, pays attention to that, is schooled enough in those fine points to be able to not let that happen. And, we have also talked about the COPC potentially taking over some of the role of the Finance Committee and letting the Finance Committee be strictly the budgetary group and not some of these other articles that have a small, if any, financial aspect to them. So right now I'm seeing those are the 4 roles that we've defined, or we're starting to define, and I see them all as potentially valuable additions to the COPC, the form of government, and the town overall. Thank you.
Well, I will, I agree with my colleagues here that, more responsibilities for COPC evolving and what we incorporate and talk about with input from the current COPC. But it also interacts with the role of the moderator. And I, for one, think there's a possibility that, as we redefine the moderator's role, who appoints FinCom might become something to think about. So I'll propose for discussion that the FinCom be appointed by COPC rather than the moderator. Again, we'll get to further discussion about the moderator, but his role right now is, or that position's role is can be powerful. And so I think COPC involvement in whole or in part is important. I would add the role in redistricting with the town clerk, and rather than an ad hoc committee be assembled by the town clerk, as we just did, who better than the representatives from the 18 precincts talking about the impact on town? Admittedly, the next one's not for 10 years, but perhaps looking at other charters, sometimes there's a midterm, a 5-year look at precincts and things. I see Larry shaking his head, but at least every 10 years as a possibility, including that in a responsibility for the COPC. And again, just the larger, evolution of COPC as both more responsibility and looking more and more like a council in terms of more frequent responsibilities than just twice a year. So I agree.
Please make sure your microphone is turned on.
Sorry. I'm sorry, the last time this came up, it was the Finance Committee that was pushing back. And the moderator was leading that. At the time, I remember thinking that they were the ones that should monitor all of the articles. So there is a definite interplay here between the Committee of Precinct Chairs and the Finance Committee. The Committee of Precinct Chairs, of course, has the value of being publicly elected. And the Finance Committee, as we've already been discussing it, is who appoints it. So I'm sure we're going to revisit that issue as to whether it's appointed by a committee, and again, that's been debated over the past few years, or whether, as we currently do, the moderator makes all those appointments. So this discussion of these two committees are really tied together and what their functions are. Larry?
Just one correction. The people who worked on re-precincting were appointed by the selectmen, not the town clerk. The town clerk, the role of the town clerk is, although traditional, the only statutory responsibility lies with the select board. So that's just.
Is that possible if we put that in a charter, it would pass legal muster?
Obviously, we can, if that's what we decide is a good idea, that's something that could be. My suspicion is that it could only be advisory, because the state law gives the responsibility to the select board, and I have to say that I spoke with the state people, and they said that hasn't come up before. So we could try anything.
Or I just can point out, I know I'm a squeaky wheel, if we were in a council form of government, then the council could appoint those redistricting committee. So they have the statutory responsibility, either the select board or a council.
Yeah, okay.
I think it's interesting what Plymouth comes up with, because a lot of what we currently have in the charter is where some of our ideas are on the cutting edge to begin with. I think the state's kind of expecting that new ideas come out of Plymouth. Betsy?
Oh.
Oops, sorry.
Thank you, Bill. I do want to make some comments about the COPC, but before I do, David has spoken often about his interest in council, and I was wondering, David, if you would tell me what your belief is in the difference between a select board and a council.
the council is representative of the entire town, whether it's precincts or districts. And they are the legislators, and they appoint the administrator or the town manager. But the buck stops with the council. In our current form of government, we have the elected select board as the sort of executive, and the people are the town meeting, that's the legislative. And there's a separation between the legislative branch and the executive branch. In a council, the legislature appoints the executive, but I think it's, correct me if I'm wrong, Larry, it's more of a monocameral rather than a bicameral, a form of government.
Yeah, I mean, a unicameral, but.
Or a unicameral,
Yeah,
okay.
but it's open. It's open. So different councils do different things, so,
Yeah.
but yeah.
So what you're recommending is that this council be both the executive branch and the legislative branch?
Yes.
Okay,
But-
I just
but-
wanted to be sure I
yeah,
understood
but-
your distinction.
They appoint the town manager or the town administrator, but ultimately the buck stops with them.
So they're 100% town meeting and select board, the council that you've seen?
Yes.
Yes, okay.
And I will say, and again, because I've said it over, my ultimate goal is representative with elections that are competitive and with decision-making that meets far more frequently than twice a year. Now, if, again, as we discuss and evolve, if a form of town meeting, a leaner form of town meeting that meets more frequently emerges from our deliberations, I would be satisfied with that. It's basically competitive elections representing the whole town, however we structure it, meeting more frequently.
Thank you for clarifying that,
Yeah.
because I know there's more than one form of city council, and I didn't know which one you were advocating for. Okay, thank you. So now if I might make some remarks about COPC. I was the chairman of Precinct 12 for at least 5 years and was a member of the Committee of Precinct Chairs, and even before that, as a town meeting member since, I think, 1999 or 2000. I saw a huge progress in how well town meeting operated as the COPC became more and more involved with town meeting and began to discuss and implement ideas. And so whoever came up with the idea of the Committee of Precinct Chairs, I think, did this town a great service. And I noticed that town meeting members are better prepared, town meeting is running more smoothly, and I think in many ways we've tremendously benefited from the Committee of Precinct Chairs. Again, there's this question in my mind about the executive branch and the legislative branch. And it sounds as though some people think that maybe the Committee of Precinct Chairs could somehow have an executive branch function or become like some part of the executive branch. But I don't know if that means also having a select board, and some things the select board does and some things the COPC does. So I think there's still a lot to figure out in terms of the Committee of Precinct Chairs. For myself, for Precinct 12, if we had a caucus in which I was the chairman of that caucus, and then we had a vote, but only 5 people could come to the caucus, then I could vote for myself and 4 other people could vote for me, and then I would suddenly be in a fairly powerful position on the strength of 4 votes plus my own. So I think we need to really think about how these people are selected, because I don't think 4 people really represent the town. So, and that's certainly a viable thing that could happen, a real thing that could happen. 5 people show up to the caucus and they elect somebody. So, I think that a combination of COPC, city council, town meeting, we've got a lot of options. But I would caution against giving a lot of power to a person who didn't have much representation in their vote
So some of the
become
ways
committee
around
of
that is
precinct
you could,
chairs.
have you ever thought of having town meeting vote for the moderator and 15 people to serve on precinct chairs?
Yes,
Have it
I was
elected from the
thinking about that.
larger body?
Yes.
Where 135 people are deciding on who's going to be precinct chairs and who's going to be the moderator. By the
Right.
way, you'd have to, try to make sure that, at the precinct chair level, that each precinct was represented.
Right, and I've been thinking a lot about that. Wouldn't necessarily have to call this committee of precinct chairs, this new group. They could be just 15 people selected from all the town meeting members in town, and we might have a rule, for example, that no precinct could have more than 2 people, but some precinct might not have anybody, because nobody wanted to serve in that particular capacity. Because we're talking about, as someone mentioned earlier, upping the level, much higher level of time and commitment on the part of these people. So there might be a particular precinct that didn't have anybody who wanted to make that commitment. So I think there's a lot to discuss, and that's one of the things that I consider would be having town meeting vote for a certain number of people to represent town meeting and make decisions and so forth. It wouldn't necessarily be the chairman. So you could actually have a committee of precinct chairs, and you could have a chairman of each caucus, of each precinct, who would do the daily or the yearly work of that caucus. They would, call the meeting, they would set up the agenda for the meeting, they would, facilitate the meeting just for their precinct. But they wouldn't necessarily also have to serve on this bigger, more time-consuming, more demanding committee, if that makes any sense. So that's what I was thinking about, over the last few weeks. Thank you.
Larry, you had something you wanted to add?
Well, let me first respond to some interesting ideas that Betsy came up with. First of all, my understanding is that a group that elects a chair, although there might be a term, can change their minds at any time. And therefore, if one thing to consider is that if the Committee of Precinct Chairs became more powerful and an important issue came before them and they had the power actually to make a decision, various caucuses could remove the person that they sent, which something for us to think about. I mean, I'm not saying positive or negative, but it has a little bit of both. The other question, I think, for Bill, is you said that they could act in an emergency in between town meetings. I think we have to determine what their
Absolutely.
powers would be.
Yes.
I mean, appropriation, how much appropriation, it's a pretty tough.
I think, Larry, it's important to keep them in a legislative function and not the executive function. I think for government to really work, you have to separate the two, and they can't overlap. The executive board, whoever it is, whatever the executive authority is, basically sets long-term policy, is thinking out in the future. It's the legislative branch that appropriates the money and passes the bylaws and passes the articles, and they're the closest to the people. They represent the people. And I think that's the beauty of our system, whether it's federal or state or local, is to keep the two separated. So I think the committee of precinct chairs or council, or whatever you want to call it, is a legislative body that's going to pass articles. And of course, what it's the kind of emergencies I'm thinking of are legislative emergencies, not executive emergencies. We're not talking public safety and the kind of things that the executive board would be taking care of, tornadoes, whatever. It's I'm thinking this committee of precinct chairs is to act legislatively in between town meetings.
I'm trying to think of examples. If there was a sewer break. Yeah, I just came up with that. And we spent, what, $48 million by the time the $48.25 million. Is that something?
I think we could actually write this. I think it'd be very interesting to scope out what these powers are. But, right now, if something happens, that we put it all in the town finance director to propose and the finance committee. But I think that We have to have a more organized body that considers these kind of requests in between town meetings. I mean, this is the whole reason that I'm told that we need to have more town meetings, is
Mr. Chairman.
things are falling through the cracks. And who's speaking? Frank?
The voice on the wall.
Yes, go ahead if you...
No, it's an interesting discussion, I think very relevant, that keeping them in the legislative process. But you know what happens in government on larger levels, so there's an emergency, there's going to be a declaration of some sort by the president. He goes to Congress and he looks for their affirmation. And that sort of thing could be very important politically and public-wise. So with that $48 million, now, in a lot of ways, it showed the nimbleness of our executive branch and the wherewithal of our finance department. At the same time, it would have been important, I think, to bring in, or valuable to bring in maybe a group like the Committee of Precinct Chairs we're envisioning, to say that they affirm this action, that this expenditure, this initial outlay or whatever. And they may be hesitant to do so, but it'd be very important in the political process of the town. So I can see that role working really well with an enlarged capacity of COPC. Thank you.
Thank you. David?
I was just thinking in my mind, and I've been away a little bit while, so correct me if I'm wrong, but let's say I come up with an article. It has to go to the Finance Committee, and it has to go to the precinct chairs. So you could actually streamline things if you had a separation of issues, and you could take one, you would have one less step for whoever is presenting an article, whether it be a person or even whether it be another board or commission or committee. So if you separate it, Finance Committee does finance, Committee of Precinct Chairs does non-finance, you'd save a step for whoever is in the process. Am I wrong?
It doesn't have to go to the precinct chairs.
Wrestling, did you want to add something?
Just a couple, it doesn't have to go to the precinct chairs. It's a courtesy. The precinct chairs used to have a forum where they brought people in that they wanted to get more information. So it doesn't have to. Just a couple things. It was interesting to me with the redistricting that the public who's starting to pay attention had a lot of controversy. They went to the precinct chairs. The precinct chairs went to the selectmen and said, it's state law, you have to have a public forum. And because of that, they had to take a step, not public, but you need to have a public forum. And because of that, they took a step back and created that, a bunch of people from the town to create, a larger
Working group.
working group, thank you. So it was really interesting how precinct chairs is starting to take that role. And I think that's something, we should look at, and we should really, because the public needs somebody to go to, because they don't always know who you go to. And I think the precinct chairs is starting to take that. Just for an instance, FinCom has an emergency fund at its disposal. So here we have an entity who was appointed, not elected, making decisions on some financial output that, is kind of scary to me. And we talk about the sewer, and I think, Frank, you're right, it did show some nimbleness, but it was also, I think it was interesting that you said the precinct chairs should have had some input to that, because, I think precinct chairs was watching that going, wow, that's a lot of money. Who's paying that? Where's that money coming from? And I think that, it's whenever, I always go to Al Haig when, the government fell apart, and he was like fourth in row, and he's like, I'm in charge, I've got this. And I think that's something that we really need to, nail down in the charter is, okay, the selectmen had to make a decision, they had to do this, but there needs to be some more checks and balances, and I think that something like the precinct chairs, they're starting to flex their muscles and say, hey, wait a minute, what about this redistricting? Hey, what about the chaos going on right now? And I think that that's something that the public's looking for, is they're looking for an entity that's paying attention, that they can go to, and they can go to the precinct chairs and say, hey, what's going on with this? This is really scary to me. And that's I can see the precinct chairs starting to evolve.
Betsy?
Something went straight back out of my head. Something jumped in my head what you were saying, and I thought, that's brilliant, and then I lost it. It had to do, yeah, I know, it was brilliant, and I was thinking, and, I got distracted by thinking how much I love process, because you say something which makes me think of something, which makes somebody else think of something. So it'll come back to me in just a minute, Bill, I'll be back.
Okay, this is a good discussion. This is exactly what we should be doing. It's broad, it's far-ranging. I think there's a chance to really flesh out some of these ideas in a charter. A lot of people over the last several years, I get questions all the time. What are the precinct chairs really supposed to do? What does this mean? Because it's very vague. And if we start to tell them these functions and write them actually into the charter, I think it would go a long way. Betsy?
I do remember now. Thank you. I distracted myself. And that is that one of the statements that is made is that there's no way that town meeting can meet more often than twice a year. And yet, I think that with the Committee of Precinct Chairs having more of a role, that we could actually have 4 town meetings a year, because we would need less articles in each town meeting. Then we wouldn't have to have all the town meeting articles in the spring and the fall. We would have some, each season. So I thinking David, what David was saying was having town meeting meet more often. I think the Committee of Precinct Chairs could help with that. I think that if the division between finance and non-finance articles were to occur, it would not put as much burden on the Finance Committee to have articles ready for town meeting. If the town executive branch knew that each town meeting they were going to bring forward certain articles, that they wouldn't have to bring forward as many as once, so that would ease some burden there. I actually think that we might have a better functioning government with more town meetings, not less well-functioning. I think we keep hearing, we could never do 2 town meetings, because that's what we're used to doing. And so people are saying, well, if we keep doing it the same way, we can't have more than 2 town meetings. But we don't have, we don't have to keep doing it the same way to have more than 2 town meetings. So thanks for
Larry
kind
and then Bill.
of make me think.
Larry?
Let's be clear about the number of town meetings. We've established in charter and bylaws that there should be 2 town meetings. That's minimum. So the idea of, if we need more town meetings, it's a frighteningly simple matter to get a town meeting going. I mean, 200 signatures, or just go to the select board, and the select board says there's going to be a special town meeting. So putting articles on, if the select board is amenable, no signatures. If the select board's not amenable, it's only 100 signatures that are required to put articles on town meetings. So the idea is, what we have done, I think, in the past 15, 20 years, is we've come up with a system whereby there is a concentration on 2 town meetings. Especially before that, we used to have specials all the time. Believe me, when you clerk, you notice that sort of thing. But it is very easy, and state law makes it very easy to have as many town meetings. If there's an emergency that only town meeting can deal with, no problem.
So basically, it's 30 days' notice?
Yeah, you could, yeah, I mean,
And I was trying to think the other day how many times we've done this. We've actually done it, not that, we've done it more than a few times. I mean, since I've been here, we did it for the movie studio, we did it for the Esplanade, didn't we do the Oberry Street? I mean, articles that, for one reason or another, are brought back in a special town meeting. And sometimes they're reversed in the special.
Yeah, I'll just, again, speaking for myself, I
So,
still would like to have
the
it.
guy at the other end of the
knowing
table.
that-
Go
Go ahead.
yeah.
Bill has the floor.
So, Larry's absolutely right. We all know that we have this set spring and fall, and the fall typically had been utilized not for the focus of the budget articles, but other articles. That's why they brought it in to be the fall annual town meeting. For a while, they used to call it the fall annual special town meeting, but now it's just called the fall town meeting. But you're right, there is this concentration around articles for the spring and the fall. The warrant opens, it closes. The warrant is open right now until next week, and then closes for the annual. The spring opens, I think, after the holidays and is open until January. What you might consider doing to accommodate, because I've been thinking about this, like Larry, I am familiar with this process of securing articles and getting ready for town meeting, getting prepared to go to the selectmen and FinCom and getting the material ready. The CPA's had to do it now for 20 years, and in that capacity, there is this concentration. And sometimes an article might not be ready for prime time, but it's rushed to town meeting because we don't want to wait until the fall, and it really isn't warranting a special town meeting, because we've had special town meetings in the past more frequently than we're having now. We're not having as many special town meetings. We used to have them more often. They were kind of common. It'd be every couple of years you'd have a special. But what you might consider doing is a rolling warrant, where the warrant is open throughout the year and people can put things on it, knowing that they don't have to rush something to town meeting. So we'd be looking at more than just 2 town meetings a year, but we would have 4 town meetings a year. And now we're getting down to less of a concentration of articles. Now we spend more time on the articles. So if we have 10 articles here and 10 articles here and 10 articles here, the intensity of combing over that article will naturally occur. Because I know that sometimes an article will make its way through town meeting and everybody's busy talking about the other article. And so we are going to have to, I'm in favor of more town meetings per year to lessen the concentration of articles, to heighten the debate around and the knowledge before they vote on that article. So I think that if we had more articles, more opportunities to gather and vote on those articles would be better served in terms of how we combed over it. And the idea would be that you would have a rolling warrant, where the warrant was open throughout the year, where these articles were placed on it. And we would situate the town meetings accordingly.
David?
Sounds good to me. No, I just, because I've been saying it in the past, but, and then looking at our language, I mean, we say at least twice. Specials are certainly allowed, the way it's set up. But I think, as we thought about it and kind of fleshed it out, we could, our charter says the spring annual, is really focusing on the principal budgets. I know state law requires, reporting of that, but we could, fine tune the language to show that the other ones, or maybe even the summer one deals with certain things, the fall with emergency budget things, and then the interim one. So I think it would be possible to spread the work around, as Bill says. And the charter does not have to be specific about second week of this, because we say established by bylaw. So it allows, the bylaw process to determine second weekend of this or that. It gives a little flexibility, or we could build it in here. But I am absolutely in support. We heard Dave Gould, we heard others talking about grant cycles and things that he doesn't even apply for things because the cycle doesn't fit decision-making. And that's only one example. Go ahead.
Excuse me, David, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to raise my hand while you were still, I thought you was pausing. But there are certain things we know are always going to happen. Enterprise fund, rolling some money from this to that, I don't even remember what all the things are called. But, yeah, but we call them housekeeping. That could be in one town meeting perhaps, because it only has to happen once a
Well,
year.
this is what I was thinking about, there's some of these automatic articles.
Right,
And there's no reason we have to convene 135 people
right,
to get them passed.
yeah.
Precinct chairs, whatever you want to call it.
Right, so I think that's a way we can talk about the committee of precinct chairs. Yeah,
Well-
because the whole purpose of committee of precinct chairs has been to make town meeting more nimble and make town meeting more effective. And so I think we can expand that conversation.
But I think its function is make the government more effective.
Right, for the
working
people,
with
for the
town
residents.
Because
Yeah,
when you
but I-
want to put it into just perspective, put it into this perspective. The warrant is going to close next Friday.
Yeah.
Won't open till August 10th. So it gives you some perspective of, that's the next warrant that will open for fall town meeting
I think
in
the idea of a
October.
rolling
So
warrant-
the rolling warrant would accommodate this idea of directing articles that are specific to a subject matter to that time and date, and, but still being flexible to allow something that popped up to be dealt with. I don't want to be too rigid on, you got to put all the finance there and this one
No,
there, but
What
we,
about a rolling agenda with the committee of precinct chairs sort of being the traffic cop?
something to that in
Saying,
nature,
you know,
yeah.
That should really be a big enough town meeting,
Yeah.
whereas this
Yeah.
article, you could probably handle it.
Yeah, but it's important to note right now that our warrant is closing next week. It won't reopen until August.
Wednesday.
Yeah, well, and.
It's a long time.
I like what.
Oh, is it
what-
closing this week?
Close
The warrant?
Day after tomorrow.
It closes, I'm sorry, it closes
Yeah, I
tomorrow.
was going to say, I like what you're saying, Bill, that by spreading them through the year, you'd have more debate and more scrutiny instead of just
Right.
even bundling them into a single vote. Because even the enterprise funds probably deserve some debate and say, what do you mean by that, and what do you mean by that, this. So, good idea.
Right. Betsy?
And to kind of build on that, and I love the idea of the rolling warrant, having been a chairman of a committee that put articles on the warrant, the Open Space Committee, it was true that, it was a long time between town meetings. But another possibility, I like the idea of keeping the executive branch separate from the legislative branch. I think that that's a good way for government to operate, but it's also possible to have more selectmen. That's also something we could talk about, is more selectmen, so that we have a balance. Because as our town has grown, we've kept the same number of selectmen, and perhaps more representation on the select board would be helpful, and more ideas and more people bring their experience to the select board, so that we would have more history of those people in terms of what they have experienced, that they can bring their expertise to the select board.
Larry?
Bill, I'm a little unclear, Bill Cohen, I'm a little unclear as to what you mean by a rolling warrant. I mean,
Well, I think we'd have to discuss that with council, that once we achieve council for this committee, but I'd have to explore it a little further, but I've been thinking about this ever since David Peck brought it up months ago, this idea of the need for multiple town meetings.
Okay, so you're talking about multiple town meetings and having a warrant, okay, because in reality, although the warrant closes on a specific day, and although the select board opens the warrant at a certain time, in reality, the only one that matters is the closing of the warrant, because over the past 3 decades, the town has accepted any article that comes from outside at any time.
Right.
It's only that it appears, so it's not a question of the warrant so much as the question of when it's going to be discussed.
Correct. And there's things I've been dealing with this for some time, where I might not have the language of the article. The warrant is closing, but I'm going to secure the article language because we're still processing applications. Something might come up. Sometimes I'll reserve an article just as a safety measure, because you never know with the Community Preservation Act if something falls on your lap that we have to rush to town meeting. We've called for special town meetings. That's how we bought Center Hill Preserve. That was a special town meeting. But in the past, we have tried to accommodate this schedule by just locking in an article, and then I play basically a mouse and cat game with the fourth floor, because they're chasing me around looking for language, and I'm hiding until there's no chance of me hiding anymore. But I've played around with this idea of that's not really an effective way of doing it. If we were to explore this idea of a rolling warrant associated with 4 points in time, that might be addressing something not being properly debated or seen by the body.
Further discussion? So we will continue this in a couple of weeks with the former chairs of the Committee of Precinct Chairs on January 3rd. I think the last real task of the commission before we set about doing the charter is to listen to some outside officials from other towns that have different forms of government. And we've been putting together a list of invitees. And I expect the best time we're going to do this is in January at our next two meetings, and with a little bit of spill over to February for folks that can't make the two meetings in January. So just to tell you what we sort of have on the agenda is David Peck has put together a good list of council representatives, and the spearhead of the Amherst council effort, which was successful, to put a council in effect, has been invited and she's accepted. But because the Amherst Council meets on Monday nights, particularly in January, she can't make it those two nights, so she's accepted, I believe, for the 14th of February.
Correct.
And she's probably the best person in the whole town there to speak to
I
that.
will say we may have two guests, both the chairman, or the council president, and their vice chairman is the one who was on the Charter Commission. So we have the Charter Commission alum as well as the council president.
And that's Amherst.
Yes.
Did anybody respond from Watertown or Barnstable?
Watertown's coming January 24th,
Okay.
and that's the council president. I've not heard from Barnstable, but
Right.
I continue to pester them until we can get one of them here.
I
Very
did
good.
talk to Mark Sylvia, and he is looking at the 3rd and the 24th. I'll probably know more later this week.
Former town manager here in Plymouth, and he's, what's his duty in Fairhaven?
He's currently acting as their moderator.
Oh, he's the moderator. Okay. And then we have the moderator of Brookline lined up for either of those two January dates. He's been a moderator forever in Brookline. And Betsy has contacted a Mr. Charles Sumner, who's got lots of responsibilities. He's held many roles in various towns on the Cape. And I guess currently Betsy's moderator still is Brewster? But he's been involved in many of the towns of the lower Cape, right.
What's his name again?
Charles Sumner, S-U-M-N-E-R,
Wow.
like Sumner Tunnel.
Charles Sumner. That's like the tunnel.
I hope nobody comes looking for him with a cane.
Famous senator.
So we've got,
Yeah, also, if I might say, Bill, I was able to get Andrew Nebenzal on the phone. He is the person who represented Sharon on the League of Women Voters video that we all watched.
Betsy, are you, we
and
should invite that person
He's,
again?
yes, he really wants to come.
Okay.
He's a lawyer, and he's got some trials coming up, so he's trying to fit us in between conferences and trials.
Okay.
So he's shooting either for January the 3rd, and I talked to him about just answering the questions or Zooming, and he said, I really want to be there and answer questions.
Right.
And you know, interact, so that would be his last resort, he really wants to be here. So he said January 3rd or the first Monday in February.
Right. Good.
That
So
was
I think
Andrew
that
Nebenzal.
kind of rounds out a list. You see, we don't have any mayors on the list, but I don't think, we've heard mayors in the recent past at the Charter Review Committee level. And unless somebody strongly would like to propose a mayor, I think we've got our hands full with the people that are coming.
And Bill, also, a former classmate of mine from 100 years ago, has functioned in many ways, including meeting member in the town of Dartmouth, where I graduated
We'll
high
see.
school. And so I've been talking with him back and forth, and I don't know that we need to have him come as a
As I
speaker.
remember, Sharon had some good ideas in their charter. It'd be interesting to hear what they
Yeah,
have
well,
to
this
say.
is Dartmouth, and so I've got the name of 3 people in Dartmouth who are town meeting members and, or are moderators or whatever. So if the committee, the commission would like, I could simply talk to them, do some question and answers, like the ones you sent out and so forth, rather than have more speakers. So I'm sure they would be willing to come if you want more speakers, or I can simply interview them.
I think we should try to get this completed by the 14th of February.
Right,
This
so
phase.
I can simply share
Right.
my notes with the.
This may be, vamping into the next agenda item. Attached to the agenda was a suggested list
Yes.
of
Questions, right, yes.
for representatives from multiple forms of government.
Well, the reason I contacted Dartmouth is they have 290
Yeah.
town meeting members, and I wanted to ask town meeting members, how's it going for you in that town meeting?
Yeah,
set up?
I think it'd be great verbally, but also the question could be sent in advance.
That's what I
and-
thought,
and-
yeah.
And some people may not be able to join us in person or Zoom, but might send back
Right.
something we can.
Yeah, these are
digest.
actual town meeting members
That's
who
an
have
excellent point.
experienced the
David prepared a
290.
first draft of a list of questions, and I worked on it, and we now have a agreed-upon draft of questions.
Yeah.
Do
to
you
go
want
out
me
to
to
these
invite them,
people
or
ahead
do you
of
want
time.
me to just talk to them and bring you their comments? And send them
Right.
the questions. What would you prefer? I've got all the phone numbers, I've been emailing back and forth, but I haven't made any invitations, because I wanted to see if we already had enough invited people.
Okay, sounds good. We have one little glitch to take care of. I just learned today that the nuclear committee, so was it NIDCAP, or whatever it's called, is trying to sign up for Mondays, and the chairman told PAC TV they expected to have this room on January 24th. And so I'm pushing back, and I don't know how, of course, Michelle not being here, we can't really find out what happened, but I understood we had this reserved through February, at least.
So shall I invite somebody from Dartmouth, or we want just to ask them to answer the questions by email, and I'll share that with everyone? What do you prefer? Which,
I think, Betsy, why don't you do like we're doing with Mr. Sumner, just tell me who they are, and I'll send them an invitation. and
Okay.
Keep track of who they are and when they're coming in.
okay, yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
All right. So assuming we get through these various meetings with outside folks and we hear their ideas and stuff, I'm looking at the item 4 on the agenda, which is a timeline, just to see if we're all on the same page here. So January and the first week, maybe the middle of February, we'd hear from outsiders. And then we need, I think, my suggestion is we start coming to grips with the actual issues and the charter that we're going to prepare, and basically start that in mid-February. And we would then need town council, and I've asked council, not necessarily town council, I've asked town council just to give us an estimate of what they would charge us, and we're working on a budget, because I think starting in third week or so of February, we've got to have council present at least every other meeting, if not every meeting, as we are doing the drafting and asking questions, and they can do research, and we'll move the process along. The budget has been presented to the finance department, which will be in the town meeting for vote in April. And it includes the printing costs, the council costs, and also a publication cost. The publication is, we're required to put it in the Old Colony. There's no ifs, ands, and buts. It's in the statute. It has to be a newspaper, general circulation, and that's going to be probably about $8,000, somewhere between 4 and 8, depending on the size of the print. And then we're required to get it in every residence where there's a registered voter. And that can be done, though, with a bulk mailing. I think it's 17 cents per piece of mail. And every house that has a registered voter that lives there should be getting that, and there'll also be extra copies if they don't receive it. And that all takes place in early 2023, but we have to budget it in the April 2022 town meeting, because that goes to the next year. So that's the timeline. Does anybody have any thoughts, discussion, comments? Okay. So we're all together on that. That's good. We had a couple of items still to discuss. It's interesting that the moderator, we just started to talk about it, so let's talk about that. Betsy had some good ideas going back to the select board. And we actually had a very good comment from a citizen. Mr. Steve Bulletin sent a letter in, and I put it in your packet and sent it to you because I thought it was an excellent suggestion in how to handle the master plan. And you can read his suggestion there, but he's basically saying that any time a decision is made by the Board of Appeals, Planning Board, or any other board that's making a decision that affects the town looking forward, the person in charge, chair, whatever, of the board or whatever commission who makes those decisions on behalf of the board would have to certify that the decision is in conformity and consistent with the master plan. So it's kind of a nice check.
So how does, just curious,
Yes.
On the zoning board of appeals, we render decisions.
So, well, the Board of Appeals is adjudicatory.
Okay, that's not us.
You have to follow the bylaw.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, that that would be in conflict of,
Unless there was some discretionary element of your decision.
I thought you said
Yeah,
the zoning board of appeals.
It's something we have to look at. I know you're adjudicatory, but you may have a
Yeah.
bit of discretion.
Correct. I'd like to know what that is, because in
Okay.
the years that I've been on the committee, they keep telling me
Right.
that I can't
But I think
base
every
my
time
decisions
somebody
on.
has to sign something
master
saying
plan.
that I'm familiar with the master plan, and I certify that this is consistent with it. Betsy?
Yes, and under C, Section 2C of the agenda, it says role and makeup of Finance Committee and how it is formed. I would like to add to that Priorities Committee that we've looked at from the town of Sharon that separates the Finance Committee from a long-range priorities, financial priorities committee. And so they have two different committees. One is looking at the warrant and, you know, what are we doing today? But another committee is looking at the long-term, and they are in communication with the select board, the town meeting, and the finance committee. But their job is 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, which I think is hard sometimes for government to be doing it all, looking at today and all the emergencies and all of the needs, and also doing that long range. And I think that this Priorities Commission, I think I brought that with me, that it's a bylaw in the town of Sharon. And they look at things like fixed uncontrollable special expenditures. They look at estimates of appropriations for the future and so forth and so on. So I'd like to tag that in there so that we don't lose track of the Priorities Committee, because I think it's something that
No, I thought that.
any town could benefit
I
from.
saw that.
Yeah,
Betsy, that was in the Sharon Charter, right?
yes, yep.
Okay, so moderator is the next thing on our list here. We haven't spent any time really discussing the moderator, how he is selected, whether it remains an elected position, whether it should be elected by the town meeting, or anything, or any variation. I know there's at least one charter where he's elected by the town meeting.
I do.
Comments?
I like the elect, I'm all for the having town meeting elect the moderator.
Yeah, I agree.
From the town meeting's ranks?
Yes, from town meeting rank, we would elect somebody for, I mean, we can talk about the term and
But
whether
then they
it's.
couldn't vote, could they?
Right, I'd see a conflict in electing somebody from the ranks of.
Oh,
town
no,
meeting.
no, that town meeting elects the moderator.
Okay, all right, yeah, not from their own body.
No.
Oh, okay, good. Yeah, no, I definitely like that.
Larry?
Don't want to be a stick in the mud and say we have to keep what we have. But it's a skilled position. You know, the question of how we get a moderator is a good one, but there are laws. I mean, it's laws and practice and a lot of preparation. And I can understand the idea of not having an election, because for the same reason that we don't have a town clerk. elected, that we're looking for a person with certain skill sets. But the idea of electing by town meeting members, unless you're going to elect 6 months before so that the person has a chance to prepare, it's a concern.
No, I wouldn't say instantaneous election. You'd elect somebody for a period of time to serve in that capacity. I'm sorry. If you were to elect a moderator, you'd be doing it for a period of time.
Well, so what, Bill, why
Yeah, you'd
don't,
have a term for that, and they'd be elected by town
is there
meeting.
some feeling that the moderator's term should be shortened to some respect? It's interesting that all these other towns that we're talking to, the moderator seems to have the 20-year position. I mean, the people that Betsy's inviting in, that I'm
Nobody
inviting
wants to
in,
do
the
it.
moderators have been there like a very long time. Is that something we don't want to have continue or not?
Well, term limits, I'm not talking about term limits. I'm just talking about what Larry indicated, that we want to be careful if we reduce the election of a moderator to the body to make sure that we build into it components that assure that we're getting the best of the possibilities. So I think the moderator should be answerable to the body.
Bill, I think that what Larry's saying is true, that a new person coming on board would need preparation, but that's true in any time a moderator resigns. If a moderator resigns, then a new moderator is going to need to come on board. So,
When's the last time that happened?
but it's going to happen. I mean, nobody lives forever. I don't think anybody lives forever. So there's going to be a point at which, and it doesn't mean town meeting won't continue to elect the same moderator year after year.
I mean, it's
It
interesting.
just means
if
they
you-
have a
if you read
choice.
Town meeting time about the moderator, there's actually two very firm schools of thought on the moderator's function. One is that he's strictly there as a referee, and he serves as the servant of the meeting. They can be overruled by town meeting. In fact, we have something now in our charter that allows that. But basically, he's there to serve the town meeting and simply, it's like traffic policeman. The other school of thought is the moderator is supreme. He makes decisions that can't be appealed. He generally knows the law forwards and backwards. And you have these, and if you read, it's interesting in town meeting time, various things follow from whichever school of thought your town follows. David?
I'm just going to, an idea, the expanded responsibilities of CLPC could be to nominate the moderator for election by town meeting, and then review credentials. Because I think Betsy's right, or I think Larry's right, that you don't want to kind of Joe off the street who may not even know how to moderate a large group. So you'd need some, some credentials and experience. But the COPC, who is responsible to move the articles along and different things, could nominate for one of the first actions at town meeting. And
Yeah,
then
there's
get a good referee.
There's at least one town that does have a way, at a town meeting, they appoint a nominating committee. And that nominating committee goes out to work. In that particular case, it was to come up with finance committee members, but the same idea could apply to a moderator. And then he's subsequently elected. That's it.
I just wanted to remind the group that one of the towns that I researched, their bylaw says, or the charter says, that any ruling by the moderator can be appealed. But our charter says only points of order can be appealed. So it's right here, it says, "A motion to appeal the ruling on points of order shall be allowed by the moderator and be decided by a two-third vote of the town meeting." But one of the towns says any ruling by the moderator can be appealed, no matter what it is. So I think maybe giving town meeting more power over what they can appeal would be helpful, I think, because I think sometimes town meeting members that I've been sitting around have gotten
So Betsy, I think
frustrated.
when that was written, that we were trying to be very precise as what it was that was being appealed. And points of order are the kind of things that moderators rule on. And the fact, Martin, it's come up in the last few years, it's always been a point of order that was the issue. and then it was appealed, and then the moderator went forward and didn't listen to the appeal. If there's another way of writing it to make it broader, that we certainly can.
Yes,
look at that.
I can bring you the information from this other town, and I know, I had a chance to look at, I'm going to peek ahead a little bit to what Mr. Neville wrote, but he also had some suggestions on the moderator, and I think that town meeting has to be the final decision maker on everything.
Right.
That's my, not the moderator. So Peter Neville was mentioning who could speak when, and that's 100% decided by the moderator right now.
Yep.
And town meeting doesn't have any say over that, but that might be something town meeting wants to have a say over.
Well, at
And we
least-
don't have that mechanism in our charter
At
right
least two
now.
of these individuals coming in are moderators, so it'd be interesting to get their take. Larry?
Good point, David. The last time there was a change in moderator, it was a contested election. There was a dissatisfaction, I think mostly with the appointments by the moderator, but dissatisfaction with the moderator. Someone ran and won and has been moderator ever since, mainly because there hasn't been the same sort of serious reaction. I mean, everyone has some feelings on the subject. Just like to point out that there was a time, probably 20 years ago, where the moderator had some conflicts on multiple articles and stepped down for a time. And the assistant moderator, who had been a select person, was eaten for lunch. It was not a pretty picture. And, you know, there are two parts to the moderator. One is there has to be a certain flexibility. I understand that part. And the other one is there has to be the ability to make the meeting function. I mean, I think that we can't lose sight
part of the skill
of
set.
that piece.
It's part of their skill is the parliamentary procedure, the rest of it.
Yeah.
Right. Interesting. Any other comment? So the next item is certainly timely. It's a discussion of the role of town manager. And I guess my first question is whether and maybe David, I'd ask you, you're on this town manager search committee, whether the charter provision on the responsibilities and background and so forth of our town manager, is that sufficient to guide the committee or not?
Well, I can't speak for the whole committee, but the charter is crystal clear
Right.
in my mind, and at least some of the others, if not perhaps all. But the charter is crystal clear, you know, selectmen, policy, administration, town manager. And that seems to be a recurring theme as we've been going through our interviews. That is pretty much what's,
Well, I guess there are two aspects. One of the duties, once they are the town manager, and that's what you just expressed well, and the other is the qualifications they have to be chosen as town manager. That's also in the charter.
correct. And that's self-explanatory, too.
Serving in the capacity of this committee, I notice the charter doesn't speak of the process when we have to appoint a town manager. It's just basically the selectmen. And we have this group that's been formed, but then, you know, as I think about this, it should be formalized in the charter where that when it's time to get a new town manager, it's not a discussion whether or not we'll have a working group to process and make recommendations to the town meeting. But also, you have no say. You just recommend this, and they decide what happens.
Correct.
So there, you know, the other thought is not only should there be some formalized language in the charter where there is a group that is going to process resumes and, you know, come up with a summation of the candidates, but also maybe be the tying vote if let's say there's a tie on a vote for a town manager, that the subcommittee would break that tie. Something to that nature, where you have some skin in the game. You're doing all this work, and you're just kind of putting it on the table and walking away.
You're overthinking, buddy, you're overthinking. It takes a majority vote of the Board of Selectmen, it takes a majority vote of the screening committee. Now, bear in mind, having gone through this process quite a few times, from '98, when I got back on after my tenure in the '80s, there are a lot of times you appoint the assistant town manager because the assistant town manager has done such a good job, you make them the permanent town manager. So you want that flexibility. And that could be as detrimental as it is positive. I sat on the board when Ellie Beth was Don Jacobs' assistant. She became acting town manager for a while, and she was doing such a good job, I made the motion to give her the permanent position. I was also on the board when Ellie retired, and at that time, I asked Mark Sylvia, would you be interested in being the town manager? And he said, I'm not ready. So that's when we hired Pam Nolan, who subsequently left. But during that period, Mark had been the acting town manager long enough that he had grown into the position, and I made the motion to appoint him. And I was successful in both motions, but, you know, I mean, that's just my personal experience. I'm not infallible, so I could have made a horrible mistake along the line too, but you want that flexibility. So don't overthink it. Leave a little flexibility in it.
I do not think I'm overthinking it. No, I'm not. I'm not overthinking it. We just came off of nearly, I would say we had probably one of the higher functioning town managers on the South Shore. In the last 2 years, I think things became problematic. We're at a point in time that we should step back and take learn from that lesson. And many people are involved in this process. It's not just the selectmen that interact with the town manager. The town manager is acting with everybody in this community. I'm just trying to think of a way where there is some community input when it comes to choosing a town manager, because this person is just not serving a board of selectmen. This person in our town has a very powerful position. We have a strong town manager form of government, and backing away from what we have experienced. And I think that it is something that we're all aware of. We should learn from that lesson. And is there anything in the charter we can do to build into it that would, address some of these reservations that we experienced?
Bill, if I might?
We should all read the charter, maybe between now and the next meeting, because the charter is very specific. In Article 3, 3-4-2 is a whole paragraph, almost two-thirds of a page of the experience level and qualifications of a prospective town manager, for 5 years' experience and so forth. And it further says that it takes 4 votes of the select board to appoint a town manager, as well as 4 votes of the select board to fire a town manager. It's all very specific.
Yep.
And since we're going through this process now, I just want to ask, is there anything there that isn't working? Do we want to change that? If we're not following it, then certainly should be a reason. Maybe people aren't reading the charter, or maybe they deliberately aren't following it. But, David?
Well, Bill, I love you like a younger brother, but you need a puppy. I think we have Mark Sylvia coming in. Now, not only is he function as the moderator down in Fairhaven, but he was a former town manager here, so let's get his take on
Good
this.
idea. Terry?
I think there's a concern. We don't want to hire and fire quickly. So, the reason that we've chosen the 4-vote supermajority is to protect the process. But when we're talking about some sort of involved process in finding a town manager, basically the town manager has to satisfy the select board. They're the ones who are going to keep them. So if you have some sort of involved process that kind of manipulates the select board, that could very well lead to dismissal when the select board isn't pleased. So I don't have necessarily a problem with an advice, but mainly this is a select board process. I mean, the select board in this present process, where they chose David and 6 colleagues, that process was devised by the select board. Seems like a pretty good process, but the process has to satisfy the select board. I mean, and therefore, we shouldn't get too involved
Right.
in giving them too much advice, I don't think.
Right. I think that what I was trying to, the thing I was just looking at is that we have a strong town manager form of government, and they're hired by the select board. And the town manager is interacting with much more than just the select board. And I think that in the charter, is there some way when it comes to either hiring a town manager, that the public has some input, formalizing a working group to make recommendations to the Board of Selectmen, that is not at the pleasure of the board, but part of the charter. The charter just reads it, when it's time to hire a new town manager, there will be this committee, they will process, they will forward it to the selectmen, and the selectmen will vote. That's what I was thinking, something as simple as that, because I do recognize that we have recourse in the process. If we're dissatisfied with the town manager, we let the selectmen know, and they have the ability to remove somebody. But at the same time, is there something that could avoid something like that, where a circumstance is dealt with before it becomes problematic?
David?
Coming back to the town manager's responsibilities, unless I missed it in there, the select board does not have a review of department head hiring and firing. I think it's all on the town manager, and that includes police chief, fire chief, but, Department of Public Works.
Civil
planning-
service, police and fire.
Okay, but perhaps it would be useful just to, to create a supermajority requirement that the select board review recommended hiring and dismissal, because otherwise it could be abused by a town manager. And so I'm just kind of throwing it out there, just that there's some degree of support. I'm just looking at the people we know who are in those current positions, and if for some reason one selectman, gets, kind of upset with them, could potentially run different department heads out of town. I'd like some degree of review of both hiring and firing. Just a thought for department heads.
Bill?
Because I think in council forms of government, the councils that I looked at, the councils had, review of major position hiring.
Yes, right. Scott?
Sorry, sometimes I have to jump up and down for people to see me.
Yep.
Just from the last committee, I don't know if you can probably remember, I was in favor back then of a simple majority for removal. I'm still in favor of a simple majority. I haven't changed from that last charter committee as far as my opinions on that.
Of a town manager, what about the appointment?
The appointment is the
Takes
Board of
4
Selectmen
right now.
appointment. As far as appointment, I don't really see a problem with the appointment. I just think that, with everything that's been going on and issues that had been identified and went back and forth for a long time, I was in favor back then of a simple majority for removal.
Right.
As far as appointment, I agree that it should be, more than just the Board of Selectmen who just picks. That there should be some type of a, committee search with recommendations that are forwarded to them. There should be a check and a balance on that. Because, while we've had some good candidates, and my hat's off down there to our senior former selectmen down there. But, sometimes just because they're the assistant doesn't mean that they're the best for the job without actually, taking a real hard look. And we've had some good, some good town managers in the past. But I think that, a little bit more of a check and a balance is probably in order. But as far as, like I said, removal, I've espoused simple majority for a number of years now.
Mr. Chairman,
Okay.
Frank?
yeah, I also think, though, I'm not completely familiar with it, but one of the things that I used to note that school departments did is that when they'd hire a new superintendent, there'd be various processes. There'd be a search process, and there'd be a review process. There would be also a public process where the candidates, the finalists, would, in a public forum, be interviewed. I think that serves, ultimately, the most important thing about it is, I think the public needs to know who's being selected, needs to have a perspective on that person. They may not agree with the final decision, but I think it's important to have that part of the process. I don't know if that's required. I don't believe it is. I'd like to see that.
Who would be in charge of the process, Frank?
Well,
Setting
I
up
think the
public,
process,
getting the public into it.
I'm just saying that the process would involve a search.
Yeah, I mean, it makes a
And
lot of
then the
sense.
cer-
It's like redistricting, you'd be opening it up to the public.
At least allow them to see a
Right.
part of the process where these people are interviewed and questioned, because I think then you get potentially at least buy-in from the community, at least initially. A lot of times, they may feel people are being foisted upon them, whether or not they're the most qualified or not. It's an important part of the process, and I think that should be included. It should be a requirement that there's a public portion of this.
Right.
Mr. Chairman,
David, you agree?
I got to interject. I have no problem including into the charter language that says, in the event of a vacancy, the selectmen can appoint a competent assistant town manager, or they have to have a screening process, i.e. a screening committee. But this public aspect, you got to get that out of your mind, because when we interview, it is of the strictest confidentiality so that it doesn't jeopardize the interviewee's position where they're coming from. So you have to maintain confidentiality. So although it sounds great, and the public is probably saying, wow, let's go, because this is making the procedure more transparent, it puts the candidates at risk.
No.
Yes, it does, because XYZ comes in and says, I want to be a candidate, and his town says, you know what, dude, you're looking for another position, scram. Now he's got no job, so you've got to maintain confidentiality.
Frank, go
What
ahead.
happens in the school department process is that it's only the finalists, people that have made a commitment. They're already anticipating moving their families or, going through this process. And then, if they were not to reveal that, that would be, untransparent on their part. So when you get down to that final group, I think it's important for everybody. And by then, they have to admit, it's like the football coach that we all hear about all the time. Oh, I'm not thinking about this, I'm not thinking about it. Oh, there they go. Then everybody hates them for that. You want to hire somebody that way? No, I think it's a process that can happen. It happens all the time in the school departments. Again, it's not everybody that participates. It's not the first 25 resumes that come in. But when you get down to that final 5, perhaps, I think, and they're all viable candidates, I think it's important for the town to feel part of the process.
So Frank, you're just talking about the people you're not talking about all the resumes that come across the personnel office. You're just talking about the individuals that might make it to the final round. So what is presented publicly already to the selectmen would be that element of public input. So you wouldn't be doing anything that's already not, in terms of their, advertisement that they're looking for this job. At this point, they're already publicly known to be looking at or a candidate for this job.
Yeah, they have to be
interesting.
pretty serious candidates.
Okay.
It's interesting, there's a certain symmetry to what this commission is about. Anybody that's kind of watching from a distance, we're really trying to bring the public into these decisions, whether it's redistricting, the expanded duties of the precinct chairs, and now we're talking about the appointment of a town manager. We're trying to get more visibility, more public participation, so that they're more accepting of it when it happens. So if we can, it's all kind of related. Yep. Betsy?
Yes, I'd like to go back to Scott. Scott, you said that this, you have maintained the belief that it should be a majority to fire a town manager? Is that what you said? So could you tell us why you believe it should be a majority and not 4 out of the 5? Could you tell us why you continue to maintain that? What's your reason?
I believe that the supermajority is almost unobtainable at times. And there's been issues back and forth over the years where this has come up and repeatedly been, that the fourth person was almost an unobtainable standard when we've had some issues over the years that needed to be addressed and weren't addressed. And, I'm not going to get into exact specifics, but, there was causes for removal that had peaked up over the years. And when was our last, was what, 3 years ago?
17.
Yeah, 2017 was our charter committee.
Right.
There was some issues taking place at that time where the supermajority was unobtainable. And like I said, from what I've seen over the years, I believe a simple majority would be what's best for the town.
And thank you. And are you able to give no examples of what you're talking about?
I choose
You don't
not
feel
to at
comfortable
this time.
giving any example?
I'm not prepared. I actually just got dropped off by a tow truck. I don't have my computer.
yeah, I mean,
I
but
don't have
I didn't
anything. I
mean-
stood on the side of Route 24 and I'm
yeah.
still cold. So.
I didn't mean
you know,
tonight. I mean, at some point, could you give us?
I'm
mean,
not,
'cause you-
I'm not
it
gonna,
sounds-
I'm not gonna delve into a bunch of personnel
I mean, it
issues
sounds
and
like
stuff.
you are recommending a charter change.
Yes, I am.
Yes. So
Right.
I was
Can I ask
wondering how
one more
we
question
would.
before we get off this? Should the town manager live in Plymouth? That's a requirement.
I think so. And again, that was based on looking lots of different charters. I think that invests that individual with the community in which they live.
Eventually, like in a time period.
Well, the other charter said within 12 months of
Yeah.
appointment.
So
Yeah.
David, you think they should? Further, Larry?
I don't have a problem with a sense of perspective. And perspective comes a little bit easier when you can go to the grocery store and not be attacked. I mean, even as clerk, I very seldom made it all the way through the grocery store without being questioned. And the controversy of being clerk is so much less than the controversy of being a select person. So I think it's artificial.
Maybe they're just asking you questions.
Well, it's, but I mean, they're pointed questions, but I think that it is an artificial requirement, and what the select board is going to make a judgment on is whether this person understands the town. And forcing the person to live in, one portion of the town, obviously Plymouth being a huge town, the person's not living in lots of portions of the town. So I think it's artificial, and I'm not in
Person could live
favor of it.
anywhere they want in the town.
I understand. I'm not supportive.
All right,
Mr. Chairman,
say, it's being 8:30.
let me get one
David,
comment in.
last comment?
I think it's a restriction. Now, the recently departed town manager has a condo in town. Mark Stankiewicz did not live in town. Pam Nolan did not live in town. Ellie Beth lived in Marina Bay. Mark Sylvia lived in Fairhaven. I don't necessarily think the requirement to move to town is a good one. It sounds good in theory, but you might be limiting your candidates. And I'll tell you right now, the amount of candidates that we had in this last screening committee, which is still active, was not what we expected. We expected a much greater field of candidates, and we did not. And it was explained to us that right now, town managers are at a premium because there are a lot of communities in Massachusetts that are looking for town managers, so the pool isn't so great. So I think we need to think about that. It might be overly restrictive. As long as the person is doing the job, as long as the person is on call 24 hours a day. We had a economic development director who lived in Douglas. We had a DPW director that lived in, west of Plymouth. We have a present DPW director that lives in Stoughton. So I think you have to weigh that. There's a lot of things here.
Yeah, I think I think Larry's right when he speaks of it being artificial. I think that that what we should be doing is trying to create an atmosphere where we have the best possible candidates, and that would be an imposition that might limit that. So I'd have to agree with David and Larry on that being
Well,
artificial.
I understand the arguments, but I also understand the arguments in favor.
Can you talk about those?
Let's,
What are those,
What the
David?
arguments are in favor? Why would we want to require the
Right.
town manager? Could you tell us next time what
Okay.
those are?
Next item on our agenda is public comment. Who would like to go to the podium and make public comment? Mr. Neville,
I'm
welcome.
Peter Neville, I'm from Precinct 10. I'll be brief. I've handed out notes of my public comment at the November meeting, and I've also attached notes of my comments for tonight. And I'm going to revise them and add to them based on tonight's meeting. Thank you again for your commitment and your perseverance on this very difficult task. By way of suggestions, which do whatever you want with them, I might suggest, or I would suggest, that your agenda items relate to the current Charter Commission section. I would also suggest, I'll put that in my notes, that you use more behaviorally observable criteria when you talk about positions, when you define.
Please make sure your microphone is turned on.
How would I know that? There you go. When you define the town manager's position in section 4, it's fairly clear what you're looking for. There's absolutely no criteria for the select board. A warm body. And that warm body appoints. Interesting choice of words. That warm body hires, not appoints, I would suggest. The language is hires, because if they're going to terminate, they are going to fire. And under section 3-43, the town manager may appeal that decision, which I feel I would ask you to consider opening that up, that section 3-4-3, so that there's some transparency as to what the issues are. I'm a town meeting member for Precinct 10, and the word chaos has been used tonight to allude to whatever the hell is going on between the select board and the town manager. I have no idea. And I'm embarrassed that I don't have any idea. Some of you probably have an idea. Why don't I? Why isn't that come before the precinct chairs? Why aren't town meeting members caucusing to hear what the issues are, maybe to have an ear to the ground, so when we hear that train coming again, we get off the tracks? You have a great opportunity to add language here that is observable, measurable. Why not do it?
Mr. Neville, just on that one point, so we could put it to bed, perhaps, the select board have committed to releasing the executive session minutes soon, because executive session, just by definition, we don't know what happened, but we want to see the minutes. And when the minutes of these various executive sessions get released, hopefully they'll tell the story.
Well, there's still no protections for that person, I feel, other than the appeal process. And whether or not that should be automatic and go to another forum, I would suggest is worth considering. Select board qualifications, elect the moderator, what is the skill set? I agree with you, he could be a referee, he could be a traffic, there's a lot of room there, but I think the skill set is very easy to define and solicit, hire a headhunter, whatever. Very important role. Anyway, I won't review my notes. I think that the current practice that the moderator has of limiting town meeting members or any member of this town to speak on one article is extremely discriminatory. He does it, and it's unbalanced. If I have a point of order on the first warrant article, am I prevented from calling a point of order again? Because it appears if I speak on Article 1, I can't speak again until everyone else has spoken. It's a very curious standard. And I've said this before. The moderator has provided no standards for his selection of members for the Finance Committee. I think perhaps the commission might set some standards for the moderator and then continue that. Thank you very much. I'll write these up.
No, thank you, Mr. Neville. You gave us a statement already, and we'll certainly
I'll add to it.
put it in the record. Thanks. Additional public comment. Mr. Cunningham?
Yes, Paul
Yes,
Cunningham,
welcome.
town meeting member, precinct 8.
Yes.
I wasn't really planning on speaking, but you covered so many subjects tonight, and I made so many notes, I thought I should say something. Actually, the specs for the town manager are probably equivalent to the mayor of city of Austin. I hope you find it. Anyways, it is interesting that I just recently learned that the select board can't even speak to the town employees or the managers, so there's a distinct, I never knew it was so distinct between that. They have nothing to do with it. They're doing long-range planning and all. So if I was going for the town manager's job, I'd wonder, they're my bosses. They don't even know how I work around the town, how I run meetings, how I select people or anything. It's, that would make a lot of people think twice. And also moving into town at this environment, you could lose your $230,000 job. You could lose $150,000 on your house very easily under a forced move under 1 year of joining the town. So that's something to consider. I had just spent some time this afternoon skipping through the meeting notes that the Charter Commission has, and all of a sudden I came to the conclusion, I see that you're preparing the summarizing of the things you'd like to change in the charter, and it all is going to start on February 7th. And I'm looking for the notes. Each person selected 3 towns to study, and I'm looking for the notes of the people that studied those towns, who they talked to, what they found. And certainly, I would be certainly want to see the ones that any town, when you're looking at towns that are 30,000 population, that's nothing like us. We're 64.5, as the town clerk says, 61.3 or 61.7, as the federal government says. But that's the whole difference in the world. I've heard it talked around here that size doesn't matter. It is. That's the main difference. And so if you're talking to someone that's in $38,000 population, 38,000 population of a town, that's what this government is geared to. So someone needs to answer, why did all the other towns at 50,000 and 60,000, why'd they change? What do I have here that makes me so much smarter than the rest of them? Tell me what it is. It'd be interesting to know. You may find out if you draw the 48 agendas from the Board of Selectmen. Take a look at them and do some statistics. I say 80 to 85% of the line items in the town spent on a Tuesday night is responding to the constituents, various needs, wants, questions, whatever it is. It's constituents, the volume of it. And you're supposed to be looking ahead for 2025 to 2035. It's not going to be 64,000 now. It's going to be 75 to 79,000. And what you talked about tonight doesn't solve it. Unless you want to get the selectmen to meet 4 times a week, you're not going to do that for $4,000. So these are rather important things. Size is the #1 involvement, and not having a person to represent the town. If you talk to the 3 or 4 last towns that changed around here, which is Weymouth, Braintree, Framingham, which I have talked to them all for ends, people that were the first in line there to take it over. 3 things they said. They just said, tell me the 3 things that were the immediate difference. He says, when I call the governor of Massachusetts, I get an email or a call back. When you're a Board of Selectmen, you're nothing. There's hundreds of you around the state. He sees this one as representing 64,000 people. So that's the main thing they said. The other was they get more money for the schools, and of course, they all hired a grant writer, which we just did, and some people are wondering why we did, but the grant writer pays for themselves many times over after they get a year into the thing. So these were a couple of things that stood out tonight. I was talking about, when you talked about the town manager and the things, it reminds me that I ended up sitting in a golf cart for 4 hours and now living 2 streets away from someone that worked for this town for in excess of 15 years in finance. So maybe we should look at the town manager that was forced upon the Board of Selectmen by one member in the 2000s, early 2000s, 2000, 2003, some of you were around then. The names he mentioned were pretty familiar to me, and see what a fiasco that was, who then went on to be fired from a town in, I think it was Providence in Rhode Island, and fired from the next town for some of the same things he did here in Plymouth. It's an interesting story. So you'll have it for those that have been here. The vegetable man was here and a few others. So you could, that'd be a looking thing to look up. These are just sketchy notes. But anyways, so I hope you do look at those agendas. And actually, you keep talking about 135 members, and I will repeat what I took the time to do the last 3 town meetings. Nobody over 125 votes. The moderator was so excited, we checked in at 132. Then we did some bookkeeping stuff, some preliminary proceedings. When the first vote came, 125 was the total. So those guys turned in, checked in, then went for breakfast. So that's the number you get, and of course, that's a problem, especially if you are adding more town meeting members, unpaid positions, to go to get ready for 3 or 4 other meetings, special meetings. I don't know how that'll go over when you can't fill 9 slots right now, the people running for it.
Cunningham, we're in the last minute. 1 minute. I'm speaking up here.
Oh, okay.
Yep. 1 minute of time left.
Okay, well, that's basically what I wanted to mention. I think we covered most of the things. That's all I wanted to say today. It was unexpected, but I'll leave you with those thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you. Just one thing. Our reviews of the various charters, many of them have been written up, and they're in there on our website under, I think it's under charter reviews or something. I've looked at them myself.
Maybe I didn't look close enough then. So basically, when you talked about, as Ms. Hall did, about some of the towns she mentioned, I mean, if you can get the person here, it is much better than if you're taking somebody's notes. And you have the chance to invite them in via Zoom. That's the beautiful part, so they don't have to leave at 3 o'clock where they are. So that's really worthwhile to hear them. I can always remember the fellow that was the first mayor of Braintree, and the people talked about the wonderful people that volunteer and everything, and it was kind of shocking the way he was a former state senator, so he knew how to speak. He said,
Okay,
you know,
well,
the people mean well, and many times they're very, very qualified and so forth.
Right.
But when I want someone to fill a certain job and I know what the job is, I prefer to hire them, you know.
Thank you, Mr. Cunningham. Come back. Welcome.
Good evening, Richard Caproni, Precinct 15. Such a disappointing meeting tonight. COP this, COPC this. It's an ineffectual body that in its lifetime has not accomplished anything. Go back and look at the notes. Okay, go back and look at the results. You guys got to be looking for results from a new form of government. All right? You need to give the people a choice. You need to allow David Peck's charter commission or charter town council to get on the ballot. Give the people a choice. You represent, you all to sit in these chairs, got approximately 2,000 to 2,200 votes. That's less than 5% of the voters in the town of Plymouth. You don't have a mandate at all, even though you might think you do, okay? You had the money to do a mailing that cost thousands and thousands of dollars. And that money and that mailing got 6 of you elected to this group. You just wasted an hour and a half of my life. This town meeting has to go. The moderator has to go. And the select board has to go. This morass that we're going through now with the town manager and the select board, we looks like some country bumpkin town down in Arkansas. It's embarrassing. And you should be embarrassed to be a leader here in the town of Plymouth and watch this stuff go on. As a town meeting member for many years, I would go and I would speak because I thought I was supposed to be there and I had something to say. Of course, my speaking was limited by the rules of the moderator. Somebody's already spoken to that. But we talk about that 125 people who come to that meeting. 10 or 15 might speak, okay? So the other 110 sit there and do nothing but rubber stamp whatever it is that's in the warrant and has been put before them by the Board of Selectmen and the FinCom and whoever else is responsible for the warrant. All right? It's a very, very inefficient process. Another thing I wanted to bring up is we've had discussions here talking about how many positions or how many town meeting members per precinct. Well, why are we discussing that? There is state law that says, does anybody want to volunteer what the state law says? You guys are supposed to know this, okay? It has to be in a multiple of 3. So somebody's suggestion that we have 2 or 3 is not a good suggestion. 3 is the only suggestion. And somebody's suggestion that it be 5 or 6 is not a good suggestion. It can only be 6. You have to be familiar with the laws of the Commonwealth as you go about your business. Very disappointing. You just yacked and talked about 1977 and 1980 and 1990. This is 2021, soon to be 2022. The world is very, very different. We have to go about our business in a very, very different manner. More town meetings, it's a joke, okay? There should be no town meetings. We have rules in the charter. Rules in the charter say that an article cannot be put before town meeting unless it is presented 14 days before the town meeting. That rule has been broken over and over and over again with no objection from the moderator and no objections from the select board and no objections from the town leaders of this community. Why do we have a charter if we're not going to follow the rules that are in the charter? Got a long road to hoe. You got to do the right thing. What you're doing now is a waste of time. You got to get productive. You got to present alternatives. You got to give the people a choice between town meeting and a second choice. Give them that choice. I'm confident the town meeting will go down in flames once the people get to vote on what form of government they want to have here in Plymouth. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Hutchinson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Joe Hutchinson, Precinct 12 Town Meeting Member. I wanted to say thank you all this evening for what I thought was a great conversation. You guys went back and forth about the kinds of choices, true discussions of choice that I thought were just extremely productive, and I learned from it, and I appreciate your efforts. I'd also, I wasn't going to say anything about this, but since Mr. Neville brought it up, I would like to agree with him about the chaos and point out that Ms. Origi says she doesn't know what the grievance is for which she's being ushered out of town. So, you know, if you could find some way to find some way to expose to town meeting members, to the legislature, what is this all about? It's been going on since July. And it is an embarrassment, I think. Anyway, but once again, you know, and just to go into this whole business of choice, I think that you've contributed enormously to how to pick a choice amongst the many variables that go into creating a charter. So thank you for this evening.
Thank you. Mr. Lynch?
Good evening. I have Kevin Lynch, Precinct 13, soon to be Precinct 5. And yes, I will throw my hat in as a town meeting member next coming election. First, just for my own information, if you would please, which, oh, by the way, I just want to say, first of all, I think this is the best place to have a selectmen's meeting. It's very homey. You can hear, you can reach out and see people and touch them versus the courthouse. That's a little bit of an editorial comment. Another thing is that I do appreciate Mr. Caproni's passion, and that needs to happen. And Frank, if you can see me, you know, you have one end of the spectrum, very passionate about it, and you have the other. And I appreciate those people that give a little bit of a what for. But if you would please, would you inform me, when will your preliminary report be submitted?
Mr. Lynch, why don't you finish your
I'm just asking a question, but
comments.
I'm just asking an information
We've stated
question.
it many, many times.
So I'm just want to write
Just
it down.
read the statute. The preliminary report is due next September,
Okay,
and the final report is due 2 months later, which would make it in November of 2022.
great. Thank you.
That's the
Just
final
wanted-
report.
And it's always nice to repeat things so that maybe someone tuning in hasn't heard that before. Next, as we sit here, it's been 7 full months, basically, close to 7 full months, that you folks have been deliberating. And my question to you is, do you as a commission believe and support a possible means of communicating the progress that you folks have experienced? Given the fact is that there are a large amount of information on your website, I'm just looking for a report, kind of like, I would call it here a Plymouth Charter Commission Communications, kind of a folksy sort of way to say, you know, kind of a summary. And I think that would be very, very helpful to the people here in Plymouth. First, to know that you are in existence, for those that don't know about it. Perhaps, you know, just a kind of a quick summary of where we've been, what we've been deliberating. Doesn't have to be extensive. And going forward, what the folks can be looking forward to in the future. And then along the same vein of what I was just talking about, the Committee of Precinct Chairs. by way of history, and I know Mr. Malaguti loves history because he's lived it here in Plymouth. I was a town meeting member when the Committee of Precinct Chairs were meeting at Lincoln Street. And I heard a proposal from a town meeting member that there could be or should be some sort of means to track the town meeting articles to help out beginning town meeting members and see where things have gone, the votes that have occurred, and what happened to it. Well, not too much of a response happened that night, but a few meetings later, a precinct chair proposed the same thing under a different name. And unfortunately, it didn't get a lot of traction. So I suggest in the actual Plymouth Charter that if you are going to have a more robust Committee of Precinct Chairs, that they should be required not only to meet, obviously frequently, but also to publish. Little thing right here, you know, town meeting update. Once again, what is happening? Transparency. What is occurring? The people are knowing about what the town meeting is deliberating, and they can look forward to and perhaps enhance the people's interest in government and increase the voter turnout. Again, many different pokers being put in the fire to try to increase voter turnout. Okay, I have one last question, if you would. This is to the Charter Commission. When a citizen submits a proposal to you, the Plymouth Charter Commission, that the citizen deems worthy of debate, okay, should the Plymouth Charter Commission, composed of the 9 members, respond to that citizen's proposal? If you would, please, does anyone have any answer?
Mr. Lynch, just finish your...
That's my comment,
We may
please.
choose to
But it's
answer when you
also a
finish your comment.
request.
Thank you.
Excuse me, one more time?
Finish your comments.
This is it. So I'm looking for you to actually answer that question. If a citizen gives you a proposal, a citizen that you have been soliciting to be part of this process, should that citizen that submits a proposal that they believe is worthy of debate by the commission, should the commission give back an answer to that citizen?
Mr. Lynch, I'm happy to respond now.
Go.
Is your comment?
All right, there it is.
Okay,
6
two
minutes.
things I want to say. First, you asked for an ongoing report from this commission. I refer you to the minutes, which are extraordinarily detailed from every commission meeting, several pages that basically tells you exactly what we've been doing during the meetings for the last 7 months.
And I pointed that out.
Secondly, as to whether we should respond to it, yes, absolutely. In fact, tonight, you saw a good example of it. We received a letter with a very good suggestion about certifying things to be consistent with the
Very good.
master plan. We identified the person who wrote the letter. We thanked him publicly.
Thank
I
you.
had received the letter. I sent it to all the commissioners in advance of this meeting, and it was attached to the agenda tonight, and it was brought up tonight. So, and we welcome that suggestion. It's one that I think that has legs, and it may well go forward. So yes, the answer is we get a good suggestion, we incorporate it, it goes in the record, it gets attached to our minutes, and sometimes we'll discuss it if we consider it, really something that's very worthwhile.
Thank you for that. I wanted to make sure I clarified that, okay, so that if I were to give a proposal. Okay, the
Thank you,
last
but-
thing, you said it's all in the minutes. That's not what I was asking, because I recognize that. I was simply saying a kind of a, I'm not going to say a
Yeah, we
folksy letter,
understood this to be,
but
time
kind
is
of
up,
a summary.
Mr. Lynch. Thank
Well,
you.
once again,
Thank you.
have a good evening.
So, no further public comment. Finishing our agenda, is there any old business? Is there any new business? The next meeting of the commission will be January 3rd, Monday night, and a schedule of upcoming meetings are on the second page of the agenda tonight. So it'll be 2 meetings in February, the 7th and the 14th. There being no further business, the motion's in order to adjourn,
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
and we are adjourned. Thank you very much. Thank you.